Okay, Sawate Mihinam and Est Stella at Hawkass Backroll the Oracle, the Barber Garden Podcast, episode 207, the Resident Evil 8 Village discussion special for June MMXXI. Backroll the Oracle is brought to you by milehighcomics.com, your new and collectible comic book store, offering an inventory of over 5 million comics from the gold, silver, bronze, and modern age, and over 100,000 trade paperbacks. If you're not into the vintage stock, Mile High Comics also has a subscription service called the New Issue Comics Express, offering a discounted price for comics ready to hit the shelves. So if you're looking for vintage back issues or a great modern subscription service, be sure to check out milehighcomics.com. Well, the theme of this episode, besides Resident Evil 8, is actually unrequited love, because the guy with me has unrequited love for Lady Dimitrescu, and I have unrequited love for this guy that's with me here. So this attractive man fish thing is Harold. He was with me before, so welcome back to the show to talk about another video game.
Woo!
And it's another survival horror action video game. So that seems to be how our talking points.
Yes, I'm a specialist in this genre. I've played 2 games of it.
Oh no! Well, what about Last of Us?
I guess. Well, yeah, yes. I played Last of Us and Part 2.
Yeah.
And part of Resident Evil 8 Village.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, we shall certainly be talking about that. And we said earlier on that because we've had these dark shows, that we definitely need a refresher sometime in the future, which we already know what we're going to do. We just have to put in the legwork in order to do it.
Yes. Big plans, big dreams require big labor.
Absolutely. Oh, that was good. Was that a Harold quote or was that another quote?
I think that was Natalie Imbruglia. No, I don't know. That was
really?
me.
Torn, that classic song.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She's my idol.
Oh, I had no idea. So we are going to be talking about the recently released Resident Evil 8, also known as Resident Evil Village. And I do want to talk about our history with the Resident Evil games. And also if you want to pick up this, like, why did you decide to buy Village in particular? And I will also ask if you liked the game, and then I'll tell our listeners and viewers, a bit of a, caveat as we're going through. And this is true of Last of Us, because we laid out what we thought of it right away, just so you could tell as our discussion progressed, like this is where we were coming from. And of course we're biased. So just starting with history of Resident Evil games, what is your history, or just Resident Evil, I should say, because we have a similar history in terms of theatrical releases, I think.
Yes, indeed. And our Resident Evil is definitely a cornerstone of our partnership here.
Yeah.
And for me, Resident Evil is just one of those big sci-fi media franchises. So I naturally gravitate towards it like I do with Alien or Predator or anything like that. But the difference is that it's a video game. And I am, despite my nerd-like appearance, which I dispute, I am actually very bad at video games, which is just sad, really, because it's kept me from so many. But like something like The Last of Us was pretty easy because that's, quote unquote, more cinematic. And we'll talk about that. But Resident Evil trends towards puzzle games. So really the only Resident Evil that I was able to play was Resident Evil 5, which was not only more action oriented, but also co-op. So if I don't even know if I played it well, because my partner probably just, helped me through the whole thing. But so it's definitely something that I've always wanted to be really into, but there's just this quote unquote barrier of gameplay, which is, it's just odd. So I have watched almost all of the movies, I think, except for the last one, the live action movies anyway. And yes, I played 5, and I was definitely interested in this most recent one. The European setting and everything, and also a particular character who we might talk about maybe. But
there's a clinical name for why you like her, but I can't remember what it is.
I know. I always get those. Was it Paris parasexual terminologies mixed up. Yeah. I really like monster movies and things like that. So it's definitely appealing on that level, but difficult for me at the same time.
My history with Resident Evil started in probably, I think, freshman or sophomore year. And I remember being in the band room, and sometimes at the end of a semester or a term, we would have, it could have been the end of the year, probably near Christmas, we would just have a day, because there was no point in starting new music, that it would just be like a fun day. And I remember a TV being in there and someone brought in the GameCube and someone was playing Resident Evil 4, which I didn't know what number it was at the time, but I distinctly remember the character going through and like these people coming out with pitchforks and everything. And now knowing, I'm like, oh, that was Resident Evil 4. And I was horrified. I remember a guy coming out with the chainsaw. I was like, I can't do this. I've gotten much better. I don't know if better is the right terminology, but I couldn't play these sorts of games. Like God of War, the very first one, when it was Hades, I had to play that with the lights on. So I guess it's progressed, just like, Last of Us, I was really nervous about that. So just practice kind of went through that. So I never thought I would play a Resident Evil game. And then Resident Evil 2, the remake, just looked so pretty. It just looked so beautiful. And Claire seemed like a really cool I just like female protagonists in games. It's always fun to play as a female. And so I thought I'll give it a shot. So I ended up getting it. It was discounted what would it be? 2019 Christmas, I guess. Yeah. And I didn't start playing it I didn't start playing it until the pandemic was like at its peak, which was really weird because I'm in Raccoon City. They're talking about this outbreak. I was like, this is too close to home and I'm playing this game. And then it was around that time, it was summer, I guess it was spring and summer, that you and I started rewatching all those films. Like we watched as many as we could. I think Netflix had a bunch of them. And then I had only seen the first one edited on TV because, again, squeamish and not really wanting to deal with zombies and everything. But it was fun to watch all of them in their theatrical glory. And then I paid money for the others, and they get ridiculous. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride. And then I recently got Resident Evil 3, of course. And then I did talk about my Resident Evil 7 history. But the reason why I even tried Resident Evil 7, because I didn't like the setting. I don't really like first person, though now that I've played some Call of Duties, like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. But I saw some more information about Resident Evil Village, and you're right, like the setting, Lady D, I mean, she's an intriguing person. Like all this werewolves and vampires, was like, oh, this is really different. I'm really intrigued. But I felt like I needed to go back because it was Ethan Winter's story still. So to play 7, and not my favorite setting, just with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was just gross. It's a gross game, but I survived it. And then, of course, Ethan, which we'll talk about him. But yeah, so I gave this a shot and game locked it on GameFi, which is lovely, and got it pretty soon, and then played it. So yeah, so my history, at least with Village itself, I think is really similar. I feel like overall our stuff is pretty similar. And I do like puzzles, because Uncharted was pretty puzzly and Tomb Raider was puzzly. So in that sense, but really uncrackable puzzles are annoying, and there's a certain level of gameplay, like Sekiro died twice, or those sort From Software, those types of games that just seem like impossible to beat. I don't need that stress in my life, but I do like a certain amount of challenge. So I don't need to flex, but I'm just saying, like, I think you're like the everyman kind of video gamer, and then I might just be like a step above you.
Oh yeah.
Would you agree with
Might
that?
even, I mean, I like my primary console in the heyday was like the Xbox 360, which was the bro console. So I played all the Halos and Gears of Wars, things like that. So, and I think whenever, like, video games are such a a fun activity, and I think perhaps American labor has sort of infected my brain. So when I'm playing a video game, I'm like, I can only do this in the fun window of my life, and then I have to get back to work or something like that. So if I run into an obstacle that I can't immediately sort of overcome with a gun, then I start to get like antsy. And I can't immediately just turn to the left and see the door that I have to break
Yeah.
because I can't sort of read the language of the game. And so I read something recently that was a blurb on a review that was like, the puzzles in Resident Evil Village are so straightforward. And I was like, yeah, but I'm such a dumbo. I really couldn't figure out any of them.
I will say I had to restart a couple times because I felt like there was a glitch and it was not allowing me to do what should have been done. I don't know if you got to the section where you had to use like hanging braziers, aren't they called braziers? To like move the fire. You either had to run into it or you had to shoot it in order to light something else on fire. And there was one that the trajectory, it was not
Yeah.
hitting, it wasn't doing anything. I was like, okay, so I have to restart. So there were some little bumbles there, but yeah. But I agree with you. I was trying to follow up on something that, I mean, video games are supposed to be fun and escapist. So I totally get what you're saying, that yeah, if you're getting stressed out in an atmosphere that should be more fun, then yeah, it is hard to complete or continue on.
And plus with the genre of survival horror, there's so much friction there already.
Yeah.
And it's a different kind of zone than feeling like super empowered by all these bro games. I gotta stop using that term, but
Yeah, did you wear like a cutoff tee, or what are those called? A muscle tee when you played those
muscle
bro
tee,
games?
yeah. And I had the pink shirt with the pop collar, and I really looked super cool.
I bet
So
you did. I
yeah.
bet you did. Okay, well, before we get into it, with Village, did you enjoy it? And should I say what the background is now, or do you want to say whether you enjoyed it or are enjoying it? I should use the present progressive.
I think you have to explain because it wouldn't make any sense for me to render a judgment like that.
Okay. So this was planned. I'll just give like a little background. We were
Yeah.
planning it to record this next week. He works well with deadlines, people. So you give him a deadline and then he like works up to it. So I was really surprised when he texted me one day and said, "Can we actually record this week?" And I just want to be fresh. And then I think there was like an aside that said, "You're not going to be happy with me." And I thought, oh no, what's going on here? So he did not finish the game. Where are you right now?
I just encountered the first Demiscrete daughter, and I emptied all of my bullets into her, and I had to shut it off because I thought I don't know.
You just need to run away, which we're going to talk
I
about.
know.
But yeah.
I did run away, but I didn't know that there was I didn't know there was a door you had to break down.
Oh no. Okay.
Smart.
You were really
I am
close
smart.
actually to seeing your lady friend,
I
your
know. It
crush.
was just after that, but
Yeah.
I just couldn't fit into the time budget.
Woman Crush Wednesday. Okay. So I think we'll be okay. I think our discussion, I mean, surrounding, well, this game, we shouldn't hit anything that you haven't looked at. So what he did was, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't even need to speak for you. You have watched some gameplay footage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It was an 8 hour. It wasn't a speed run. It was just a walkthrough.
A regular one. Okay. So he's got the background to a certain extent, not, high level background. So now it's on my shoulders. He just like brought my attention to the fact that I could be a hypocrite because I was roasting. I don't even think dressing down Harold and Donovan in regards to a show that they did not watch and they were critiquing. And I'm like, how can you do that? And so he said, we're going to do that now. Well, friend, I just want to tell you, friends, that I have at least played through the whole game. So we're there. So would you say, of the stuff that you've played, let's go with that, have you been enjoying it?
I wish I could say that I did, but I think this is another. I know. There's a thing where sort of late into the Halo cycle again. One of the producers talked about how like he kind of wishes it didn't have to just be a first person shooter. It could just be sort of like an archaeological thing where you just walk around the school environment. And that's kind of what I was thinking, that the gameplay was just not really my style, but I really did just like the setting, in that sort of gothic, not really gothic setting and all that stuff. But yeah, it was just this sort of strange combination of like the puzzles, but also the worst parts of the Tomb Raider reboots where you were just sort of shuttled along a path and it was sort of like a universal ride where rocks are falling and you're being knocked off a cliff, which I don't know, that's not really that fun to me. But yeah, I wish I could come on here and say that I really enjoyed what I did see, but unfortunately no.
That's fine. I think that'll make for a good discussion. I would say that I had fun at times. I enjoyed myself at times. I was horrified at times. We'll talk about that. And this was probably the most horrified I've ever been playing a game, one particular section. And I did absolutely like it more than 7. But the feeling when I played it is just completely different because then, once I was done and I shipped it back to GameFly, I went back to Resident Evil Remake because I'm going to try to get the platinum, though it's going to be a long journey. And I just have such fun with those remakes. So I'm trying to figure out or reconcile, like, why is that? What's the difference between the two? But yeah, so I would say like yes and no. I enjoyed it. I do have some heavy criticisms of it, and I think gameplay especially, like, did they find a good balance, that sort of thing. So I think this will be a good discussion. We can suss out everything.
And what would you say was kind of the primary reason why it was an improvement over 7, would you say, in your experience?
The setting. I think the setting for sure, like I said, well, I mean, I was about to say Louisiana is not, necessarily. Well, I guess I could say Louisiana just in the sense of I could go to Louisiana. I could travel down there and look at it. And this was like, oh, wow, this is really something that is different than something I've experienced. And it's really fun to see. And there are some beautiful moments. I mean, that Castle Dimitrescu, is so beautiful. And then it's paired up with other bizarre things like the factory, which I don't know if you saw many sections of that. But the setting in particular, and then the characters, I think were also really interesting. And the 4 lords are so distinct from one another. I thought that was pretty cool. And then I liked the werewolves and the vampires better than the mold and the Baker clan in particular. So I would just say like grotesque, which was 7, versus more or less like a beautiful and terrifying experience with 8.
Yeah. But and I'd like to talk about the aesthetics at some point too, because I think it's very important.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to go through some definitions, just because I think there's going to be a question where, what is this? What is this game? And does it balance itself well? And these all come from Wikipedia, so thank you for that. I think they all do. So survival horror is a subgenre of action, adventure, and horror video games that focuses on survival of the character as the game tries to frighten players with either horror graphics or scary ambiance. Although combat can be part of the gameplay, the player is made to feel less in control than in typical action games through limited ammunition or weapons, health, speed, and vision, or through various obstructions of the player's interaction with the game mechanics. The player is also challenged to find items that unlock the path to new areas and solve puzzles to proceed in the game. Games make use of strong horror themes like dark maze-like environments and unexpected attacks from enemies. And Resident Evil 1, the original, it really is sort of the capstone of this and really getting that genre started. Then we have action horror. So action horror games are a spin-off of survival horror games where more action game elements from first-person and third-person shooter games are used alongside the survival horror themes, making them more fast-paced than prior survivor horror games. And finally, the silent protagonist, because I do want to talk about Ethan. Oh, so In video games, a silent protagonist is a player character who lacks any dialogue for the entire duration of a game, with the possible exception of occasional interjections or short phrases. In some games, especially visual novels, this may extend to protagonists who have dialogue but no voice acting like all other non-player characters. A silent protagonist may be employed to lend a sense of mystery or uncertainty of identity to the gameplay, or to help the player identify better with them, which is certainly what I talk about Ethan so many times to Harold. He's probably really upset. I complain about him so much, and he has mentioned several times like it's probably so the player can identify with him. So just be aware of that. Anything to add to that before I do the cast list and then the synopsis?
I well, what's your experience with other silent protagonists, and have they been positive or negative?
My knee jerk would be Jack from Jack and Daxter.
Oh,
So that would probably, and that was, when I was kind of a baby playing games, I guess, like, or a teenager baby playing games, but that was my first experience, and I didn't really know the name of that. And it's hard because Daxter is on Jack's like back the entire time, and he's the one talking. So it's almost like it's not a silent protagonist because they're practically one character, but technically he is. So I would say there's that, and it was used in a funny way because there were times that he would try to speak and you're like, oh my gosh, is he about to say something? And then like somebody else says something and speaks for him. So the Naughty Dog clearly knew what they were doing there. So I would say that was fun. I don't think that I ever saw myself as being Jack. I think it was just like a nice little pair that you had with Jack and Daxter. There was someone else that I mentioned to you. Oh, I've only seen video of what's that, Alien Dead Space. I've only
oh
seen,
yeah.
I think his name's Isaac. Is that right?
Mhm.
So I can't really say whether I would put myself in there. And then you had mentioned Link, but I have no like personal experience with that. And Cloud is kind of a silent protagonist. I'd have to talk to Donovan, the expert on Final Fantasy VII, to see if he would agree with that. But so I would say, for the most part, well, maybe 50-50. So Jack, I think I was fine with it because of how they were able to use Daxter. But Cloud, I didn't really care for him. He was just overly aggressive. It was everyone else. And I started to like him as he developed with other characters. But I've never personally seen myself as them. How about you?
Yeah. Probably the same. I mean, it's hard to play video games and avoid the silent protagonist, I feel like. And that's part of the reason why I think a lot of video game adaptations are difficult, because suddenly you have this main character who's just he's not really a character.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like, there's been a lot of like the early Nintendo stuff that some of which I've had experience with, like, Mario and Link and Metroid. And later on, yeah, I mean, yeah, probably, yeah, 50-50. So it's always nice to see a character who's fully voiced. I prefer that.
Yeah. Do you see yourself in any of those characters when you play them?
No. And
Okay.
I think, because I imagine, because of the sort of like the Nintendo like NES origin, I imagine that the silent protagonist just came about through as a consequence of logic that you couldn't really have voice in games. And then as it went on, it took a while for video games to really diversify their main characters. And so there would always sort of be the standard white male space marine, perhaps. And that's kind of a difficult thing to ask everybody to identify with, even if it's just a silent character. So it's kind of a flawed premise that I feel like is something that is fed to video game academia, that the silent protagonist works, as a psychological thing, but in practice, I don't buy it.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to think psychologically about, is it Samos or Samos? Isn't that
Samus,
her
yeah.
name? Because probably all the males, could have been identifying, and then all of a sudden it's revealed like, what? I was identifying as a female protagonist. Say what? So that's that's interesting to see. Yeah.
I love Samus. I was just trolling, saying that her name was Metroid, but yeah.
Well, you didn't troll me because I knew. It was a trap. You tried to trap me. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, even if there's I like to see my little player avatar, especially for horror games, because you're, you know, I guess 2 degrees removed or so from the horror element, whereas
Yeah.
if you're there, you're encountering it. But yeah, I don't know. When I play as Jill or Claire, I feel like this is maybe because they're female, but also because they're badass.
Yeah.
I feel like I can identify them, even though I can fully see their little faces and everything. So I prefer to see my person, but
I wonder how it would have been different for you playing the original games, which were
oh, the
different camera angles. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know. I see it because I think they recently had remastered it or done something, and I kind of want to play like all of them, but maybe I'm a bit of a snob. I'm like waiting for the remakes because they look so beautiful. But the remaster, it just makes me nervous, and I don't
Yeah.
know what I would think about the gameplay. Like, not, it like what's the word? Well, it's not smooth, it seems like. You're running to a corner and then you have to wait for it to go. I don't know if I could take it.
Yeah, I know.
What's gonna be behind that corner? It's bad enough things dropping out of the sky, and either they'll
Mhm.
wake up or they won't. Okay. Well, cast list wise, and I forgot, but one of the daughters, the actress actually passed away before this even came out. I don't
Really?
remember which daughter though. I guess if
Oh,
you can always Google if you would
that's a
like while
bummer.
I'm doing this. Yeah. So, okay, here we go. So Todd Soley is Ethan Winters. Roll my eyes. Katie O'Hagan is Mia Winters. Jeff Sheen is Chris Redfield, which is Carlos in Resident Evil 3. So I love that. Though I could only see whenever he spoke, I was like, it's Carlos. It's Carlos. Michelle Lucas or Leaks as Mother Miranda, Neil Newbon as Carl Heisenberg, Jesse Pimentel as Salvatore Moreau, and Paula Rhodes as Angie. Andy Norris as Donna Beneviento, Maggie Robertson as Alcina Dimitrescu, Nicole Tompkins as Daniela Dimitrescu, and Jeanette Mouse as Cassandra Dimitrescu. And Becca Pruitt as Bella Dimitrescu, Aaron LaPlante as the Duke, and Carol Stanzioni as the Hag, which is that old lady that you encounter in the village.
A dual role. So who would you
Yes,
say
I know.
turned in the best performance?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? Lady D, I really like Lady D, though it's
Yeah.
hard to like separate her visage from her, her voice. But I love, you haven't seen it yet, but when she hangs up with Mother Miranda and she's like, can I, take care of this? Why do we have to wait for this ceremony? She throws
Yeah.
her mirror and what is that called, a van, basically, of the whole
Yes.
vanity, like Jesus Christ style. And so I would say like that's an amazing performance. But Carl Heisenberg, I love his voice, his affect. I constantly would call him the Big Lebowski, but he's just so charismatic. I would say
Mhm.
that might be my top of all of them.
Yeah, I can see that. I had a soft spot for the Duke. Um, might have just been the character. I kind of like that sort of he was not quite an enemy, not quite an ally.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't expect him. I mean, we'll talk more about him, but didn't expect him to have the role that he did. I just thought
Right.
because I had known of the merchant, I think in Resident Evil 4. So I just thought like maybe he's just a seller and that's it, like an NPC. But the Duke plays more of a role than I ever expected, which was cool. I think that was cool. He needs to go on a weight loss program now. Okay, so I'll give a brief synopsis again from Wikipedia, just to give people an idea of what this game was about. So 3 years after the events in Dulvey, Louisiana, Ethan and Mia have been relocated to Europe by Chris Redfield to start a new life with their newborn daughter, Rosemary. One night, Redfield and his Hound Wolf squad raid the house, assassinate Mia, and abduct. There's a reason why I'm laughing. And abduct Ethan and Rosemary. Ethan awakens next to a crashed transport truck and reaches a nearby village terrorized by werewolf-like creatures known as lichens. Ethan is unable to save the remaining villagers and is captured and brought before the village priest, Mother Miranda, and her lords. Ethan escapes and ventures into Dimitrescu's castle to find Rosemary with the support of a local merchant known as the Duke. Ethan eliminates Dimitrescu and her daughters, finding a flask containing Rosemary's head. The Duke explains that Miranda placed Rosemary's body parts in 4 different flasks for a special ritual and that she can be restored if Ethan recovers the other flasks held by the remaining lords. While killing Beneviento and Moreau for their flask, Ethan learns Hound Wolf is also in the village. Ethan passes a test from Heisenberg for the 4th flask and is invited to the Lord's factory, where Heisenberg offers a proposal to defeat Miranda together. Ethan refuses once he learns Heisenberg intends to weaponize Rosemary and escapes. Ethan encounters and confronts Chris over Mia's death, learning the Mia Chris killed was actually Miranda in disguise. Chris reveals that Miranda possesses the power of mimicry and was attempting to abduct Rosemary, succeeding when she crashed the transport truck. Chris destroys Heisenberg's factory, while Ethan uses a makeshift tank to defeat Heisenberg. Miranda confronts Ethan and kills him after she reveals her plans to take Rosemary as her own. Witnessing Ethan's death, Chris leads Hound Wolf to extract Rosemary, while a Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, or BSAA, assault force distracts Miranda. Chris enters a cave beneath the village and discovers a megamycete called the fungal root and the black god. What is that in the Japanese game? Oh, I see. It's called. Okay. The source of the mold from episode 7, or the game 7. He plants a bomb on the megamycete and finds Miranda's lab, learning that she has lived a century since coming into contact with the megamycete and was a mentor to the Umbrella Corporation's founder, Oswell E. Spencer. Oswell used her knowledge to eventually develop the T virus. Miranda experimented with the fungus in an attempt to revive her daughter Eva, who had succumbed to the Spanish flu, and the 4 lords, Lycans, and Evelyn being failed experiments. Miranda found a suitable host with Rosemary due to her special abilities inherited from Ethan and Mia. Chris also rescues the imprisoned Mia, learning that Ethan is still alive when Mia reveals her husband's powers. Ethan revives after encountering Evelyn in Limbo, who reveals that he was killed in his first encounter with Jack Baker in Dolby. So that was a plot twist, but was revived by her mold, which gave him regenerative powers, which explains many things. Yes. Oh my gosh. So yeah, basically when I think everyone's seen that scene when Jack Baker says, "Welcome to the family, son," and kicks his head in, that's when he died. So just FYI. The Duke brings Ethan to the ritual site where Miranda is attempting to revive Eva, but only succeeds in reviving Rosemary. An enraged Miranda battles Ethan, who kills her before the megamycete emerges from the ground. Ethan, his body deteriorating from his regenerative powers, having reached their limit, sacrifices himself to detonate the bomb planted on the megamycete, while Chris transports Mia and Rosemary to safety. As Mia mourns the loss of Ethan, Chris discovers that the BSAA soldiers sent to the village were organic bioweapons, which is hypocritical because that's what they're fighting against, and orders his squad to head for the BSAA's European headquarters. In a post-credit scene, a teenage Rosemary visits Ethan's grave before being called away for a mission on behalf of an undisclosed organization. As she and her escort drive off into the distance, an unknown figure is seen approaching their vehicle, which we can discuss. So that's basically RE8.
And it goes right to the origin of the whole series.
It does, yes. So we're definitely going to talk about connections and everything. So first big question, do you feel like this game is survival horror or action horror, or is it both? And if both, I'm just asking a bunch of questions. If it's both, is there a good balance?
This was a sticking point for a lot of critics who, there's this sort of recurring narrative with Resident Evil that it kind of bounces in between action and horror, and people don't generally like the action part. In this case, I think it is both, that it starts out horror and then there's at least one sequence towards the end that is specifically action. But I actually think that that's pretty cool. What did you think?
Yeah, I would say that I agree that it's both of them. I don't think we could swing. It's all survival
Right.
horror. It's all action horror. I like that it had both elements, but I personally didn't think that it was organized well
Mm,
because I think the first half, like the first, basically the beginning to the first two lords, were survival horror or just horror based. And then all of a sudden there's that big shift. I mean, once you're Moreau and you've got to go along the docks and try not to get swallowed by him, and then fighting waves upon waves of lichens and the factory and everything. So I feel like if they had reorganized the lords, it would have felt better. But it was just like, oh, well, I'm done with Beneviento. So, I won't be scared anymore, which there were still some jump scares for me, but I would have almost liked it to be better balanced, that I'm going back and forth between action and then horror.
Well, so this is my question then. Did you feel a sort of narrative utility in the shift in genre? Did you feel sort of more empowered as
Oh,
Ethan?
interesting. Yeah, I suppose that's true. Hmm.
I know you don't want to think about being empowered as Ethan,
I
but
know. Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I guess that does make sense. Just, as you're progressing, you're gaining more lay, you're able to upgrade your weapons and you do become more powerful. And that one section completely takes away all of your weapons, which was really
yeah,
interesting. So you just feel like really naked and vulnerable. So yeah, I think it does, but I feel like there are times when I feel really powerful in the remakes in 2 and
yeah,
3, but I can still be taken out really quickly just with one hit by, Nemesis or something like that. So I think there's still a way to feel powerful, but also your life is in jeopardy, if something comes out at you.
yeah. I think what really captured my imagination was the sequence when you start playing as Chris, and you bring a team into the village, which is again, it's a kind of intertidal narrative between like Alien and Aliens, where suddenly this space where that you've had to struggle to figure out and you've barely survived, and now you're sort of empowered to do something and
Yeah.
I guess effectively destroy it. And I think that that's kind of it's interesting.
Mhm.
I don't know, emotionally maybe.
Yeah. I think the Chris one I'm totally on board with. The Ethan, I'm still working out because there's just that one line that's just thrown in there haphazardly at dinner at the very beginning that, Chris put us through this training
Yeah.
or whatever it was. And you kind of still want a bumble. I mean, the man's wearing a trench coat, I'm pretty sure, as far as I can tell from looking at his arms whenever he's raised them up. Maybe a coat. I don't know what it is, but he's, just a civilian. And so you kind of want him to still bumble around. So I wish that there would be a difference, like a distinct, and I suppose there was, playing as Ethan versus Chris. I think you could probably tell that there was a difference, but powerful Ethan is still seems the same as Chris. And I think there should be a difference. Like, hey, there's this guy that doesn't have the training that Chris Redfield has had.
Right. Especially since you're fighting things like Lady Demiscreet's like mutated form. Like, and every man isn't gonna fight that thing.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it is very true. Yeah. And now it's just like old hat for him. He's just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, not again." Whereas I'd be freaking out every single time. Like, "What is that?" Oh boy. But he does say, well, we'll get to it. I'll complain for hours upon it about that. So you had mentioned run and hide gameplay, which was
Yeah.
something that I think you said it sort of turned you off on that. Do you want to talk about this now, sort of that gameplay or what you experienced and what you mean?
Yeah, I mean that genre of game, which I think was sort of introduced via the Amnesia series, and then things like Outlast and Alien
Mm,
Isolation. It kind of happened when I was sort of out with video games in between the seventh and eighth generation of consoles, and so I never really experienced those things. But it never really appealed to me in the same way that like open world stealth games don't really appeal to me because I just don't. I guess I have like a bad sense for like space and spatial like recognition or something like that. So I never know like who is where in terms of myself. So that sort of run and hide under the bed, it just it seemed like it could be really intense, but it didn't seem like it was for me necessarily.
Gotcha. I will say that it was really intense. Um, with the baby, the fetus baby thing. That was a scary situation. But yeah, I
Yes.
mean, is that the only way to create a horror element?
Right. Right.
So is that kind of what you're getting at? Is that, is that a cheap way to do it?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it seemed pretty trendy.
Okay.
Also with like Five Nights at Freddy's, and it seemed
Oh
trendy, especially
yeah.
because it was like it happened in Condorcet with the advent of like streaming video games, and those games are just so perfect for getting big reactions out of Twitch streamers.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. But then you have something like PT, which wasn't really run and hide. It was just exploring the most frightening space in all of video games ever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think there's definitely different ways to do it.
Hmm. Yeah. I guess I'm trying to think of how many experiences I've had with run and hide. I feel like this might be the only one because Mr. X and Nemesis, well, you could kind of hide from Mr. X, but not too well, but Nemesis definitely not. And then even Lady D you'd hear her stomping footsteps. That was partially run and hide, but I just feel like the anxiety inducing bad guys are the ones that stalk you with no end, and you've got to like somehow skirt around them and get where you need to get. But
Mhm.
I don't know if I can say it's not for me or it is for me, but I will say that it caused some panic. So I suppose it
Yeah.
was successful.
Well, it's interesting too that this game wasn't designed around it entirely; that it was just part of the horror, and there were
Yeah.
other, because I think the classic Resident Evil horror comes from resource management, that you feel
Yeah.
like you don't have enough bullets, and that was definitely another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. And again, I think that organization would have helped with this because I felt like after the baby, I was like safe. And so my heart rate dropped.
Yeah.
And maybe creating an environment or a feeling that you are safe and then actually pulling the rug out from would have worked really well for this.
Mm,
But I guess they just didn't want to do it that way.
I guess not. Not well. That's the interesting thing too about Resident Evil. They're always very experimental. So I guess they try something once and then they move on. I don't know.
Yeah. Ooh, I have use of horror and suspense. From what you've played, I mean, how do you feel like this matches up with a horror experience or other? Well, I mean, Last of Us, you play Last of Us, and also RE5 that you said you played. You feel like it's used well?
Um, I think so. I read ahead of time that this game was definitely not as scary as the predecessor, which I think you disagree with. Um, but I didn't play Resident Evil 7. Uh, but so I thought that it was like the village itself was a pretty creepy space, and just being around it, being inside of it was just sort of uneasy. And then I was spoiled on the baby because I saw just a thumbnail of it on YouTube, and I was dreading running into it, and to wit, I never encountered it, so I didn't have a problem.
Oh my gosh. I remember you said that you were spoiled on something, and then you said, like, it makes me not want to play. And I thought, oh no, what is this? And then I played it, and I think I immediately went to you and said, I have encountered the most horrifying thing I've ever. And you said, I think I know what it
Yeah.
is. What was it? Yeah. I like the atmosphere, especially like the atmospheric sounds. I think that was something that was mentioned above in one of the definitions, because you could just be walking and no lichens are going to attack you, but you hear them all around you. And I wear
Yeah.
headsets, so it's like even worse. But just that, like the anticipatory dread that something's going to happen and you don't know when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen. So I feel like they do well with that in the village in particular. And I suppose in the well, not really the factory, but whenever, yeah, I guess the lichens. Really, it's the lichens that I think create that. So that would probably be um their best horror suspense. Okay. So then here I was thinking about Mortal Kombat. We were doing this. If you remember when we watched Mortal Kombat, I think I asked you what's the responsibility for filmmakers to reach out to veteran fans who love the Mortal Kombat series as well as the original film, and then what responsibility do they have to new players? And so how do you feel like this, I mean, you can actually answer that question in terms of Resident Evil, what responsibility do the creators have for that? But how do you feel like it was successful in doing that, reaching out both to veterans as well as newcomers to the series?
From my perspective, I feel like it was actually really successful in this regard because it, the last, I mean, this one and seven, they feel sort of individual, at least in terms of like visual identity and things like that. So, but at the same time, as the deeper you go, you realize how interconnected it is and how a piece of the franchise it is. And so, like that's definitely a question that keeps a lot of like game producers up at night because it's gone into the marketing at this point. Like, you know, how loyal are we to the fan base, which is, you know, kind of a gross and weird thing. But when you really break down that sentiment, it's, I think it's just about how do you sort of express what is essential to any given story. And I think that this one, like, despite that it is sort of a genre departure in terms of like the fact that there are werewolves and vampires, where Resident Evil is more like science fiction based, it still feels pretty quintessential Resident Evil. I think in my opinion. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, well, it feels different at least from what I've been playing, but as I played it and looking into it more and doing research, I can see those narrative threads as well as Easter eggs, but
Mm.
a bit bigger than Easter eggs, maybe Easter goose eggs or ostrich eggs, something like that. And I agree. I think that this was such an enticing game, primarily because of that woman. You have to agree that I think, well, they had no idea, but
Right.
I think happenstance just allowed them to create this game that people hopped onto. And we'll talk about, is this a duology, if that's a word? I think it is. But I think it was great, especially for people who may have popped on just for RE7 because it's a completely different protagonist. So you've got those middle of the way, like rookie players, I guess, and
Right.
then people who are really interested in this game hopping on. And then yeah, I think the Duke, a lot of it tying back into Resident Evil 4, I think was big.
Mm.
Chris Redfield, I think being a big thing. And then I would only say that surface levelly would be the files that you discover in Miranda's lab that you find that Oswald Spencer was connected, because if you don't look at the files, you have no idea. But
Yeah.
that way it ties everything in together, because I wasn't sure how is this connected to the T virus and the G virus if we've got lichens and everything, but it with her experiments it does work out.
Mm.
So part of me, even though I'm a newcomer, part of me does want to be like elitist, and I guess that's more like inclusive, like no, we need to keep to the original. But yeah, I mean, that's rude and offensive to other people because you do want others to experience the joy that you've had playing these games. So you have to be able to find ways to do that. I think with Mortal Kombat, this isn't the Mortal Kombat show, but it's just like the ways that they did it, which is primarily Cole. You know, there was no need to do that. There was no need. So I think Resident Evil Village was able to craft a game that was able to reach out to veterans and newcomers without doing that cold situation.
Yeah, I think so. In this regard, I think it was more successful than, say, Mass Effect 3, which was trying to also get new players on board, which is strange because it's the end of a trilogy. So
Yeah.
I don't know. But with Resident Evil, you can always kind of start over, it seems.
Yeah, it does. I haven't gotten into I've seen multiple timeline videos on Resident Evil, so it seems like once you get past 4, you're getting in the weeds of
Right.
crazy stuff because Code Verona, I don't know, all this stuff. But right now it seemed like the remakes and things, you can just hop on and you'll be overall okay. I mean, you might need some background on what happened, especially with 3, because you don't realize Jill was present at the Arclay Mountains and everything. But
Right.
yeah, I feel like we're new generation of Resident Evil fans are kind of popping through with these games, which is nice.
And it's always a challenge for video game franchises to stay relevant throughout time, and reinvention is a constant.
Yeah, it's very true. Wise words, sir. My last one of sort of the overall questions before we start getting into player, character specifics and settings and things like that is just about the total play time and how it compared to the length of the other games in the series and whether you thought that it was a good length or not. And it's pretty comparable to Resident Evil 7. It took me, but I take long time, about 10 hours, but I think like the average is like between 7 and 9. I don't know, but I was busy. And so I made Harold my minion and said, can you please find these? So how does it compare to others? Is it in the low range?
Oh, I thought you
Oh,
just
that's
wanted me to
okay. If
find,
you want
yeah.
to, whatever data you have found, you can now talk about
it. 10 sounds like the shorter end, but like PC Gamer, they said that for the review it took 10 hours and 20 minutes. But if you want to collect everything, it'll be more like 13. And that was sort of that's what I kept seeing. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. And did you see any comparisons to other games by any chance?
No, but that it seems to be like pretty short relatively to what games are now. I mean, you and I have both played Assassin's Creed Odyssey. You finished it. I mean, how long was that game?
Well, it depends on if you did everything. I think that was my like 75-hour game. But that's, yeah, the RPG. I do remember IGN, I think it was on Instagram at one point, went through the total, like the play times for each of the Resident Evil games. And in the beginning, they were relatively short. Like if you're playing Resident Evil 3 and just going through and not collecting, it's about 6 hours. It's pretty short.
Yeah.
And I think the action ones, like 5 and 6, I think those were like the longer ones. I was like closer to 20. So I don't know. Yeah. But do you feel like 7 to 10, is that a good run time for a horror game? Do you think it's intentional? Like if they are focusing on horror elements, are they looking to the psychology of the player and morale? I don't know, and don't want to put them through that for an extended period of time, or is that just me coming up with something?
No, that makes sense. You also have to wonder if like maybe you get too used to the environment that it stops being scary if you're playing it for too long. In the case of Resident Evil Village too, it's also their experimentation with open world games. It's more like you have this hub, which is the village. So you think you could sort of pad out the length with that, but they didn't, and I appreciate that. In some parts, it's very on rails. There's a lot of those sorts of interactive cutscenes, and so it's very cinematic and it's very detailed. And a lot of the I do still feel a little bit of this anxiety when I play games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider or The Last of Us Part 2, which they're like it's just so much like high fidelity, intricate detail that I know, we talked about the labor last time. So much goes into these games that, I would prefer a more concise experience, because I feel like it's just like less, I don't know. It just makes me more comfortable in that regard.
Yeah. Do you feel overwhelmed, I guess, like sensory overload almost? Is that what you mean? Yeah.
I mean, especially with the PS4 generation, like it's just almost like the games look so good that it's too much visual data, and I can't immediately sort of discern like boundaries or things that the video game language that I developed through like the GameCube era, where you run into a wall and there's no wall there, but you're just sort of like, oh, I can't pass this wall. But in a game like Village, everything is practically photoreal, and so it's difficult to tell where to go or what to look at or where you can stop. So yeah, I do have trouble with that.
Yeah. And I would agree, at least in terms of, I think this is what you're saying, please tell me if you weren't, but I like to experience it and look at everything and yeah, pay respect to the people who created it by enjoying everything and marveling in the beauty. And so it is harder if it's a longer game and everything you're seeing is new, because you're like looking around like, oh man, all of this stuff that's going on. So is that something in Resident Evil's franchise's favor. This one, I think you go back to the village 3 separate occasions. You'll hit different areas, but you're also retreading paths to find treasures and unlock some of those picklocks things and picklock shelves or whatever. And Resident Evil, the remake 2 and 3, you're like constantly going back and returning. Is that something in its favor so that you can experience everything fully and in different ways, even though it's the same setting?
I think I know people like that. That's sort of the Castlevania or Metroidvania mentality of really mastering of space and really like, well, same with Dark Souls and From Software, as you mentioned. This sort of like, unlocking shortcuts and like really figuring out like directions and things like that's cool for a lot of people. But to me, that's just sort of a puzzle on a macro level. And so it's almost too much. I prefer to just go straight forward.
I see. Okay. Well, I think that's it for over. Do you have any other overall questions you would like to discuss?
We never found out who the Resident Evil was.
We I can't tell if you're joking. We never just who the Resident Evil was.
Yeah,
is that what you just said?
Who was the Resident Evil?
I'm assuming it was Mother Miranda. Do you not think so?
I guess she could. I mean, she really was. Yeah. But maybe, yeah, I could go with that. Yeah. Megamycete was
that is an interesting
Evil.
I've never thought about the title in that way. So
what does the title mean?
What does it mean? Well, the Japanese is biohazard, I know, which I think fits all of them because it's all about some sort of virus. But Resident Evil. I don't know. Do you think it's just from that first one because it was in a residence, or is that just too literal?
Literal? No, I mean
mansion,
that. Right. That could be it.
But it's not Residence Evil. I don't know. But now I'm going to be thinking about who would that be in 2 and 3? I don't know. Is it Nemesis or is it? Interesting. Resident Evil. Well, that's a thinker. We can ask the audience to let us know what Resident Evil means. Okay, well, this is what happened last time. I tried to screen share and it was like too much and it overloaded my computer. So let's see. But I do have images of different characters and peoples. So we're going to go through some of the characters. We'll start with this dude. I know him. Here. Okay. So Ethan Winters. And I took this, there were several things, but I wanted to specifically have one where his face is hidden because I do want to talk about that. But can we just talk about who he is as a character, as a protagonist? And let's just get it off our chests. Maybe mine more so than yours.
Yes, I can't wait to hear you finally just let everybody
let loose. Yeah. So who I don't even know what his character is like. His comparison to other protagonists, and is he well liked as a protagonist? Which you actually sent me. I actually took up I saved that image that you sent me. But how would you describe him as a character? Let's go there. Let's pretend this is literature recommendations or required reading with Thomas Sala. How would you describe his character?
Richly complex, tragically compelling.
Excuse me? I'm about to drop you from this call.
I think Ethan is kind of a mascot for Resident Evil 7 because that game was very consciously a soft reboot, taking the producers really looked at the elements of the series and they said, you have all these iconic larger than life characters like Claire and Jill and Chris and Leon who have been in other games like Marvel versus Capcom and things like they're beloved in video games. And so Ethan is not going to be a sort of like super soldier character. He's going to be an everyman. And everyman, that can be interesting, but I feel like I personally, I don't find him too interesting now. I don't know. I mean, he's kind of a bummer.
Thank you. So we can get back together now. I've forgiven you.
Oof. Oof.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The everyman. I think that he's just Joe Schmo off the street that we pulled in, and let's see what he can do. And boy, is he really beat up, and he doesn't have any training, and he's just trying to make it in this really bizarre world. And that's
Mhm.
specifically for 7, and then 8. He got some training from Chris, and he's special now. But yeah, he is. And unfortunately, I have to say, now we tried to separate in Our Last of Us, which I think is necessary, the actor or actress with the character. But I feel like the actor has something to do with it, if only like the affect or how he is presenting what he is saying, it boggles the mind. Like why he says things. I mean, the one I complained to you about mostly in this game is when Mia is getting shot.